right, tonight we begin in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Now, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is a section within itself. So far we've been going through chapters 1 through 7. It's been an emotional, traumatic experience that Paul has been talking about. He's talking about his ups and downs, his fears, his comforts, and so forth and so on. He has been making statements about his enemies. Now in chapter 10, through the rest of the book, then he's going to get back on that again. And he's going to be talking to his enemies. And he'll be using a lot of irony and sarcasm at that time. But chapters 8 and 9 stand by themselves alone as something that's different. Now, unless we understand the context of the 2 Corinthian letter, why it was written, why we would not know what he's saying in a lot of these verses here. So let's put it in its context. Now, you've had all of this before, so we'll not have to take a long period of time. Otherwise, why it would take a long time that you know. But as you go back to the book of Acts, let's put it in here of what really happens. And Paul's first journey, he took off from Antioch, and that's the area that he covered. Went up in there, then he came back down. So that was his first journey. Then, as he takes off now on his second journey, why he's going to take off from Antioch, and he's going to go up into Galatia. He gets up to Galatia. He's going to preach in that particular area. Now, it's rather interesting as you read Galatians, the 4th chapter, as he writes to the Galatian brethren later on in life. He tells why he preached to them to start with. And so I think it's kind of interesting. So let's turn over there to Galatians chapter 4, verse 13. I've made mention of this on various occasions as we go through. But let's see what he says here as he's writing to them. Now remember, Paul's writing this letter later on to them, and he says this. Now, he starts out in let's start in verse 12. He said, I beseech you, brethren, become as I am, for I also am become as you are. You did me no wrong. But you know that because of an infirmity of the flesh, I preached the gospel unto you the first time. Now stop. That is interesting. Paul was going up through there. Now this is all we know, by the way. This 100% of everything that you know about the establishment of the churches in Galatia. So was Paul heading up and not intending to stop? But he got sick? What? I don't know. I don't know. But here's the only thing I know. Paul said, you know that it was because of an infirmity of the flesh that I preached the gospel to you the first time. So somehow it was due to my illness. It was due to my sickness that I preached the gospel to you. Now, we'll get back to that sickness that he had. He calls it a thorn in the flesh, and that'll be in the 2 Corinthian letter when we get over then to chapter 12 then. Now, let's continue reading. Here's the interesting thing. He said, and that which was a temptation to you in my flesh, you despised not nor rejected, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. Now, you know that the reason I preached to you the first time was because I was sick. I had an infirmity of the flesh. And that was a temptation to you in the flesh. What would that mean? That which was a temptation to you in the flesh, you despise not nor rejected. In other words, Paul is saying that which you would be tempted to despise and reject, you didn't do it. There was something about my illness that would cause you to not want to be around me. You would despise it. You would reject it for something about my illness, but you didn't. You in contrast to that, you received me as an angel. You received me like you would receive Jesus Christ himself. And so you were very receptive to me. Now, you say, well, what could it be? Well, he goes ahead in verse 15 and he says, where then is that gratulation of yourself? Now, these people now were causing him a lot of trouble, and he's calling their attention to it. Where is that same feeling? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to thee, me. So then am I become your enemy by telling you the truth? So now then, later on, these people are causing Paul a lot of trouble, and they're starting to turn against him. And so he's calling their attention to the fact. He said, what in the world is going wrong? He said, I'm amazed at how quickly you can turn. And then he said, you know, the first time I preached to you, it was because of the infirmity of the flesh. And that was a temptation for you to reject. You didn't. You received me like an angel, or like Jesus Christ is in here then. And so then he says in here, where then is that same gratulation or appreciation of yourself? For I bear you witness, if possible, you'd have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. Cause you to think maybe Paul had an eye problem. This is the indication that you'd get. And are there certain eye problems that people have that cause you to blink and want to turn away and not look at somebody if their eyes are runny and so forth? And so, yeah, there are certain conditions, and that may have been what it was. Now, there's another little bit of information, and we're just putting a little information here together. All this is circumstantial. But Paul did not write his own letters. In the Galatian letter, he closed off, and he said, now, you see with how large letters I write unto you, which is a sign that I use in every one of my letters. So Paul, when he wrote, he would quote his letters to one of the men with him. They would write it down. Then Paul would write the last paragraph in the letter with that strange handwriting he had, which was large letters, which again would maybe have something to do with eyesight. So that's all I know. And it all fits together that perhaps that thing that was wrong with Paul was some kind of a repulsive type of an eye problem. That's all I know about it. Now, your salvation doesn't depend on it. It's not important for us to know. It's just an interesting thing that I wanted to throw out for you tonight as you look at these various things. But it is important for you to understand this, on the second journey, is the first time Paul preaches to the Galatians. And we'll see why in just a minute. Patsy. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. It could be. We don't know. It could be. That's the reason I'm saying. See, I can't say now. I know this is what it is. We don't have any evidence. I've never read of any evidence where this was a normal statement like we do today. You know, well, I'd give my right arm for this there. But it could be, and so that's the reason I say we put it in the opinion. If it wasn't for those things like that, then I'd say I'm pretty sure I know I can convict you on circumstantial evidence in there. So I just say it. That's the way it appears to me. And but what's it worth now that if you even knew, if Paul told us, you see, it'd be there. But here is something important. He takes off on the second journey. He goes up and he preaches up here to the Galatian churches here. Then you remember he went over to Troas, and that's where he had that vision. And then he went from Troas up to Philippi, and from Philippi to Thessalonica, Thessalonica to Berea. And then he's over at Berea, and where's the next place he went? Remember, it's down to Athens. He called Timothy down, and so they're talking about in there. Then he goes over to Corinth. Then he heads over to Ephesus. And who does he leave over at Ephesus? You remember? Priscilla and Aquila. Then he went on back down to Antioch. Now he's going to come back around, and Priscilla and Aquila will still be at Ephesus. Now we're ready to start on the third journey, so keep this in mind right in here. As we take off now in here on the third journey. He's going to go back up to Galatia, and he's going to do something at Galatia. Now, you don't read about this in the book of Acts. As you're reading about this on there, you don't read about it. But I'll show you why I know that. So Paul doesn't, Luke, as he's writing about Paul's journeys, he doesn't tell us. He just went up there in this area, up in Galatia. Then he left, and he went down to Ephesus. Now, when he went down to Ephesus, he goes back down. That's where he met Apollos, where Apollos had preached that, and so they made those corrections and so forth. But what did he do at Ephesus on the third journey? What book did he write? The First Corinthian letter. Remember that household of Chloe sent that message over, so he wrote that First Corinthian letter. And who did he send it by as he sent it back over there? We talked about sending it over with Titus as he would send it over. So now you have the First Corinthian letter. Now, when Paul wrote the First Corinthian letter, I want you now to flip back to chapter 16, and I pointed this out to you as we went through, but I pointed it out so briefly, intentionally, knowing that I was going to come back to it, that you probably don't even remember it. And so I said, okay, now here's something, and then we'll be coming back to it later. Now, when he wrote that first letter, in chapter 16, he's writing over to Corinth, he said, now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I gave order to the churches of Galatia, so also do ye. Now, you see, he's writing right there. He said, now, I gave order to the churches of Galatia. Do you see why I put that circle around back there? And I told you that Luke doesn't tell us what he's doing, but we're going to find out what he was doing. So he went up to Galatia. See, on his second journey, he established those churches. On the third journey, he goes back up. And now on the third journey, he gave them a command concerning the collection for the saints. Now we'll see that collection for the saints is the Jerusalem saints. It's the saints at Jerusalem. So we're talking about this collection now that I wanted them to take up for these poor saints down at Jerusalem. He said, upon the first day of the week, let each one of you lay by him in store as he may prosper, that no collections be made when I come. And whensoever I arrive, whomsoever you shall approve, them will I send with letters to carry your bounty unto Jerusalem. Now he calls this a bounty or a gift. The way we would use the word bounty today is sometimes in the game department, they don't do it anymore, but they used to do it, when the bears would get too heavy or the coyotes would get too heavy and the state, they were tearing up trees and so forth, the state said, we need to thin them out. Well, they didn't pass a law and said, everybody has to contribute $5 to pay people to go kill a coyote. What they did is they said, we'll give a bounty. We'll give you a gift. It's going to be a free will gift. Anybody kills a coyote, brings in the tail, we'll give you $5. It's a bounty, is what it is. So it's not anything we owe you. It's not anything that we are demanding. It's not a tax. It's a bounty. We're going to give you $5. And then when we get it down, we'll quit. We'll say, hey, we're pulling it back. Well, that's what Paul is saying. He's saying, now, we're going to send your bounty, going to send your free will gift down here, and whomsoever you choose, now this is important, so remember it. And we won't see how it's important until later on. But remember this. Whomsoever you choose, you, the Corinthian church, you get your money together, and whoever you choose, we're going to give that money to them, and they're going to take it down to the saints at Jerusalem. I'm not taking your money. And if I have to go, they will go with me. Now notice here he goes on. He said, verse 3, and when I arrive, whomsoever you shall approve, them will I send with letters, I'll write them a letter of recommendation, to carry your bounty unto Jerusalem, and if it be meet or necessary for me to go, they shall go with me. So there may be a reason that I need to go, but if I do, I'm still not taking your money. You are going to choose your own messenger, and your messenger will go with me. This is going to become a big deal in just a minute, so I'm trying to get you to see that aspect of it right there. So now, that's what he told them in the First Corinthian letter. Then he changed his subject. He said, I want to go here and I want to go there and I hope to see you and blah, 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 and goodbye. So that takes us now to the First Corinthian letter. Okay, let's now find out what happened here. He wrote the First Corinthian letter. Titus took it over. And where were they supposed to meet? At Troas. So Paul goes up to Troas, but he doesn't find Titus. So what does he do? He went on over into Macedonia, kept going in that area, and finally he meets Titus. And what kind of report did Titus give about the Corinthians? They've repented. Oh, everything is fine. Paul sat down and wrote the 2 Corinthian letter. That's where he was so happy and contented, ... Now, in chapters 8 and 9, he comes back to this subject of giving. Comes back to this subject of the collection that they're going to send down to Jerusalem. So, that's why 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is tied in with 1 Corinthians 16:1. By the way, we'll not get to it tonight. You may want to write a note on this. Paul is going to go on down to Corinth. When he gets down to Corinth, he's going to write another letter. You remember what that letter is? Romans. He's going to write a letter to the Romans. Now, when he gets over to the end, the 15th chapter of the book of Romans, down to verse 25, he's going to tell the Romans, now, I want to come to see you, but I can't right now. I've got to go to Jerusalem. Wonder why he had to go to Jerusalem. We know. He's explained it to us. See, I've got to go to Jerusalem to carry this bounty that has been given by the churches in Macedonia and Corinth here. So I've got to go to Jerusalem here. And then once I've gone to Jerusalem and given them this money, then I plan on coming up and seeing you. So you can write down Romans 15, starting verse 25 through 31. Those instructions, whatever he says there, is talking about exactly the same thing right here. And he tells us a few things in there that he's taking it down to give it to the saints, not just the saints, but the poor saints that are down there. And he makes some comments there, but we'll not get into that. We're going to be studying 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. So you see how it's tied in to what we're talking about. Okay, with this in mind now, let's turn over and start reading. And this will enable us now to read. And most of this stuff will just fall out and you'll say, oh, I see now. Well, this makes sense. I see, because we see the context of the situation. So it starts out. He's writing to them. Now remember, he's up there. He's writing about this. He said, moreover, brethren, we make known unto you the grace of God, which hath been given in the churches of Macedonia. Now, here he calls this contribution the grace of God. What is grace? Unmerited favor. And he says, these people have given money, and I'm not calling it money from them, I'm calling it the grace of God. Now, why would he do that? Let's go back. Why would Christians give massive amounts of money to send to people they've never met in another country? What would make them do that? It's the teachings of God, isn't it? It's what God would have them to do. They're Christians. So it's like Jesus said, let your light shine before men, so when they see it, who will they glorify? They'll glorify God. And so when these Macedonians do this good work, give of this money, sending it down, he says this is the grace of God, which hath been given in the churches of Macedonia. How that in much proof of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. Now, here he mentions how poor the people in Macedonia were. Now, they had such problems up there in Macedonia that they finally appealed to the Caesar to get a tax cut, and he actually gave them one. But he had persecuted them in there, and the whole country of Macedonia had been overtaxed. The Caesars taken advantage of them. And there was another thing that the saints had suffered up there in Macedonia. You remember what it was? And what book you can go to get it out of? What's that? Thessalonians. See, Thessalonians is up there. And what range of mountains is there outside? The Olympics. And what's up there? That's the idolatry. And what were the idolaters doing when we studied the Thessalonians? They were actually persecuting, killing the Christians. And so the Christians in Macedonia had gone through great persecution. Now they were in poverty. And this word for poverty here is deep poverty. They were in deep poverty. They were, it's kind of like talking about the brethren at El Salvador. You know, as they say that there's three classes. There's the rich, and then there is the deep poverty, and then there's the wretched poverty as you've got. Well, that's what these people here were in deep poverty. But there were some other people in wretched poverty. See, the saints down at Jerusalem. And so these people now, in their poverty, not because they were rich, but in their poverty, I want you to notice their attitude. It's just absolutely amazing. Verse 2, how that in much proof of affliction, they'd gone through all this affliction, the abundance of their joy, this is what caused it. This is the attitude. They were joyful. They were joyful about being a Christian. They were actually dying for the Lord. Some of them had been killed by the Gentiles up there, as we've studied in the Thessalonian letter. And their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. So even though they were in deep poverty, yet they gave so that there was the riches of their liberality. They were liberal in their giving. Well, let's see how much they gave. 5. For according to their power or ability, I bear witness, yea, and beyond their power. They gave of their own accord, beseeching us with much entreaty in regard of this grace and fellowship in the ministering to the saints. And this, not as we had hoped, but first they gave their own selves to the Lord and to us through the will of God. So I said, here's what happened. These people in deep poverty, they gave so much, they were giving so much, they gave far beyond what I hoped that they gave, far above what I expected. And evidently Paul was telling them, look, you're going beyond. You don't have the ability to give this much in some way. Because look what he says here. I bear witness, and beyond their power they gave, beseeching us. They were begging us with much entreaty, or much begging, in regard of this grace and the fellowship in the ministering of the saints. So they were begging me, no, Paul, take it. Take this. We want to have fellowship in this ministering unto the saints. What's the word ministering mean? We polluted that word so much. When we talk about a minister, it means the preacher. It's service, in the service to the saints. What saints? The saints down at Jerusalem. See where we're sending it down there. So the saints that's down there then, and fellowship. What does that mean? What's that? It's joint participation. It's joint participation toward a common goal, where you have a goal out here, and so you're participating together to do this. Let's take a football team. The Seahawks play the San Francisco. Are they having fellowship? I'm loading you. Anytime I ask a question, you ought to know. I don't know about him. What's he going to do? Well, okay. They flip a coin, don't they? Seahawks said, we want that goal. What does San Francisco say? We want that goal. You ever notice how they tackle each other, knock each other all around, won't let each other cross the goal line? There's 11 men all participating toward a common goal, aren't they? This one. Then these 11 men are participating toward this. So the Seahawks, the 11 guys, are having fellowship. San Francisco's 11 guys are having fellowship. But they're not having fellowship together. They're fighting each other. See? But there's a sense in which they are having fellowship. Why does the Seahawks play the San Francisco anyway? What's the purpose? Money. Money. That's it. That's the whole thing. Money. We've got to have these games to go on so that the money will come in. We'll pay them to fight each other, see, to go against this, so we can have the money. We can have the TV programs. And so in that sense, San Francisco said, yeah, we'll play the Seahawks. Okay, they're having fellowship, see, in making this money. So it's participation toward a common goal. Now, he said, they went beyond what we'd hoped, and here's the reason. But first they gave their own selves to the Lord and to us through the will of God. Wow. that pretty well explains our duty, doesn't it? And when we do this, most other problems will dissolve. What should I do with my life? How should I spend this? Should I attend services? What should I do? How much Bible study should I have? Blah, blah, blah. The questions you have. Well, first of all, if we give ourselves to the Lord, that settles a whole lot of things. Lord, here I am, and you're first. See? You're first. Then it enables us to look and say, okay, should I do this or should I do that? And then it weeds out a whole lot of problems that we've got in there. So make sure we give ourselves to the Lord. It's that total dedication to start with. And as long as we're not totally dedicated to the Lord, what is it Jesus said about two masters? He didn't say it's kind of hard to serve two masters, did he? He said you can't do it. So you're going to choose whichever one. And as long as you're trying to serve two masters, that's the most miserable life in the whole world. The most miserable life in the whole world. When you try to serve this a while and this a while, but when you make up your mind, this is my master, then is when happiness is going to come. So this is what they did. Now, in verse 6, he said, inasmuch as we exhorted Titus, that as he had made a beginning before, so he would also complete in you this grace also. Now, look up here. Paul's writing this book here in Macedonia. You see that is up here. All right, who's he sending back down here? See? He's sending Titus back down. Now, as Titus came over and made a beginning, when did Titus make the beginning? When he took over the first letter. See, he got this started. Now then, he's coming back down for what purpose? To make the completion, see, of it here. Okay, so complete this grace also. But as you abound in everything, in faith and utterance, that's your speech, you're preaching the word, and knowledge, and in all earnestness and sincereness, and in your love to us, see that you abound in this grace also. Now, as Paul is talking here about these people abounding in all of this, you remember in the last chapter, back in chapter 7, what they had done when they got the letter, how much they had given themselves, how earnest they were, how zealous they were, how hardworking they were. So he said, now just like you're abounding in everything else, make sure now that you abound in this giving for these poor saints. Then in verse 8, I speak not by way of commandment. Now I want you to understand, I'm not writing this letter to command you to give. Giving is not a commandment. See, it's what he's saying. Giving is not a commandment. I'm writing to you here, not by way of commandment, but as proving through the earnestness of others the sincerity of your love. Now, what is giving? It's the end result of the sincerity of your love. Suppose I told you when Helen and I got married, she had a list of things and says, Lowell, now I want to make sure that you love me, and so on my birthday I want a gift that costs $35. And on Valentine's Day I want this and I want that. And so she made me a list. And she said, now if you give me these things, then I know you love me, but if you don't give me these things, then I'll know that you don't love me. Is there a little something cold in that? You see? So she didn't give me a list. So I don't have to do anything. I don't have a list. I don't have any commandments of what I have to do. And so I don't do anything. Well, sure. If that's true, who's in trouble? See, here's a, boy, what a fool you are. Yeah. So what is it really she wants? In other words, does she want me to prove how much I love her by coming in and saying, honey, your birthday's up, now how much you want me to spend this year? And she said, oh, this year I'd like to have a $100 present. Okay. So I go get her a $100 present, you see. Or I go out on my own and do something and bring her in my usual $15 present. See? That's something that shows her that I'm thinking of her and I love her. So that's what Paul is saying. He's saying in this, we're not working on the command scale, we're working on the love scale. How much you love, that's going to depend on your giving. So how much you give, well, how much do you love? That's what he's saying in verse 8 in there, or verse 9. Now he's going to give us an illustration. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might become rich. So he said, I'll give you an illustration of this, and the illustration that you could follow, if you want a good example, would be Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, what's that talking about? When he was in heaven, sitting at the right hand of God. He became poor. What's that? He came down to this earth, lived a life of poverty, and even died, so that we might become rich. Is that physical riches? No, that's spiritual riches. So what do you and I own now? What can we put down on our financial statement of how much we are worth? How many billions and billions of dollars are we worth in real estate? I don't know how much it sells by the acre in heaven, see? But all I know is Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. And so what is eternal life worth there? So this is what Paul's saying. He said, use Jesus as an illustration. Now, we're blessed. We're blessed tremendously. But why are we blessed? Because he sacrificed. He gave. Now, he was rich. He didn't have to do it. He had everything. But he became poor. He gave it up, all of it, so that we might be able to do this. So think about that as you are thinking about giving. You know, and kind of when you think about it in that way, it kind of turns us a little upside down, doesn't it? Instead of saying, how much do I have to give? What do you say then when you think of it in his terms? How much can I give? See? What is a reasonable thing? What should I be doing? He said, and herein I give my judgment, that it is expedient for you, who were the first to make a beginning a year ago, not only to do, but also to will. Now, you made this decision a year ago. When did they make this decision? At what point? When the First Corinthian letter was taken over. Now, he said it was a year ago. Now, they use years like we do. Sunday night, I preached that goose sermon, and I started out and I said, last year I preached another sermon on geese. Well, if you go back and look, it's not been 12 months. You know, it's been 6 months. But it was in 2002. Back here, 6 months ago, now it's here. So last year, it's been like the way we would say that. So it means a few months. In other words, the year had passed at any rate. So you started making this preparation a year ago, at least last year, to start it, that you're going to do it, and you made your will, your desire, and said, yes, we want to do it. But now complete the doing also, that as there was the readiness to will, so there may be the completeness out of your ability. So now, when I wrote you the First Corinthian letter and told you what to do, you made up your mind and you said, we're going to do it. We're ready. We're willing. That's what we want to do. Now then, Paul says, I'm writing you this letter and sending Titus down to tell you to complete it. Now then, get your plans done and complete it and get your money together. Then he says, but now complete the doing also, that as there was the readiness to will, there may also be the completion also out of your ability. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according as a man hath, not according as he hath not. Now that's a general principle, like whatsoever man soweth, that shall also reap. He's saying here, don't wait around and say, can we put this thing off until next summer? Because I know that next summer my finances will change and I'll have a lot more money next summer. Somebody will pay off their debt, or I'll be able to get a big deal, and next year I'm going to be better off than what I am now. Paul said, don't finish the job. Give what you can give. as the readiness was there, now complete the giving. Because God judges you not on the amount that you can give, but He judges you according as a man hath, not according as he hath not. I expect all of us have thought about what we would do if all of a sudden we came into, let's say, $50 million. What would you do if just all of a sudden you came in with $50 million? Wow. So we could start out telling what we would do and all the good that we would do, can't we? We'd pay off this building. I would send money to preachers around the world. I would do this. I would do that. Man, if I had $50 million, you can't imagine what I would do. Now, what is that worth? Nothing. Nothing. So the Lord said, Lowell, we want to deal with what you do have. So you take what you do have, and if your willingness to give is there, then I'll judge you on what I have blessed you with. Right? What I've given you, that's the judgment we got. So do you see how all this comes back down on our own individual shoulders and doesn't come back down on somebody telling you how much you have to give here and how much you have to give there? But it's that heart. God's wanting our hearts in here. Then he said in verse 13, for I say not this, that others may be eased. That is, I'm not telling you to give, to send down to the Jerusalem, so that it'll give them an easy life and you distressed. I'm not trying to make them a rich church and you a poor church. But by equality, whatever that means, we'll see what it is. Your abundance being the supply at this present time for their want or their need, that their abundance also may become a supply for your want, that there may be equality. Then he gives an illustration. Let's look at it, and then we'll come back here. It says, as it is written. Now he's going to go back to Exodus, where God sent the manna down out of heaven, and God said, he that gathereth much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. So God said, this is what I want my churches to have. I don't want the abundance, the riches, and the poverty of where you don't have enough. And so he said, it's just like when I gave the manna from heaven, God speaking. The command that God gave there was that every morning he would have manna out there, and you go out, everybody goes out and starts picking up manna. You pick up manna. Now, every person needed an omer full. That was the daily ration. Everybody needed an omer full. All right, everybody goes out. Well, here's all these young guys can go out, and they can pick up 10 omers, 10 sacks, you see, this big. And here's a guy, 97 years old, could barely get out there and can't reach down and gets there. How much is he going to pick up? See? Not enough to eat. All right, everybody bring it back in. And then, those of you who have more, you share with the people who don't have enough. So you look over at this poor old guy, and he's got just not even enough for breakfast. And you got 2 sacks. You give him a sack. Everybody shares. And God said, all my people will have enough to eat then, and there will be equality. Now he said, for those of you who want to hoard it up, you remember what the punishment was for the hoarding? I'll fill it full of worms, and it'll decay, see? So you go in the next day, you're not going to be able to eat it anyway. So he was trying to teach us something. Now, he's given this for us to help each other, churches helping churches, needy saints, and this now becomes a big situation, and one that we need to really get acquainted with there. So, what he says then is this. Let's now take this chart, and we'll put it in this way. I put this thing up here for those of you who want to take some more notes before I get over there, and I've not got too much time here left. How much time do I have left tonight? What? Oh, they got me on another time schedule. What, 5-10 minutes? Okay, fine. Okay, when Paul went back, by the way, and I want to get through this chart. When Paul went back, he goes back, and if you read Acts 20, 1 through 6, there's a whole list of names of people that went back with him. Guess who those people were? The messengers of the churches. You remember that I told you not to forget about those messengers? See, the messengers of the churches. Now, Paul and Luke goes back, so they stay there at Philippi, and now then, these people go on back down. Paul comes down, and he gets down, and on the first day of the week, there's where you have Acts 20 and 7 incident, see, that he's coming back out of this situation. But let's get into this now. Here it is. We've got in here that we want to find out now what this means, that there may be equality. So now then we're going to take a church. And this is a needy church, a church in Jerusalem that is in need. Now the Jerusalem church, you remember when it was established, that immediately all of those thousands of people were there and stayed there to hear the gospel. And they sold what they had and they shared with the people, and it put them in great need. And then they had a great famine in AD 44 that we read about in Acts 11th chapter, and these people were in need. And so Paul said, we need to relieve their need. Now over here, we're going to let these circles represent the churches over here in Macedonia. Now these churches had an abundance. Abundance means more than you need. It doesn't mean that you have to be rich. It means more than you need. So now we have some churches more than they need, and we have a church over here that is needy. Now that's a big word. I want you to remember it. This caused all kinds of problems in the church. So there's a needy church here. All right, now all these churches are going to send money down to this church to relieve the need. Now, why do I put all of those lines separately? I want to make this point. Every church was to select its own messengers. And Paul said, I'll go with them. So they all went with Paul. But now here's the illustration that we have here. And so these churches with abundance sent down there to supply the need of that church that's there. That's what he means by equality. It means lack of need. One church could have $100,000 in the bank, another church not have 10 cents in the bank, and still that church is not in need. It has what it needs. It has what it needs. It doesn't have any superabundance, but it has what it needs that's in there. So we're talking about a needy church. Now, I want to take this away, and then we find that all of this now can be turned around. Some of these days, these churches can get in need. The Jerusalem church can have abundance. And now then, what's supposed to happen here? Then they'll go back the other way. Let's reread this. Let's look in verse 14. But by equality, your abundance being a supply at this present time for their want or need, that their abundance may also become a supply for your want. So later on it may be turned around. So it's like gathering the manna that is in here. Okay, now then let's look at this, and then you'll see why this is an important situation. Here's the way we have it. This is the Bible way of doing it. But now watch carefully, because in the 1800s here in America, our brethren changed this. They used this, and they made a change. In the 1900s, about 1952, our brethren made another change, and they used this. And in both cases, it divided the church. And so you hear about the division of the church back in the 50s and 60s. Here really is what it's all about, and this is the major passage of Scripture that's in here. We're going to take the needs away now, and now then we have these churches. They all are equal. They don't have, they have plenty. But there are still needy churches out here. And as there are needy churches out here, then this church that I turned red is SC. Anybody know what that stands for? It's abbreviation. Sponsoring church. So here's a church that said, I tell you what, we will become a sponsoring church. So we want these other churches to send us money. Now we're not a needy church anymore. Let's just take it here, Monroe. Here it is. You find this chart. This is the way that they took care of it in the needy church. Now then, we hear over here of the needy churches in El Salvador. So Monroe says, look, we're in the best position to know what goes on in this thing. In here, we've got these reports, and we understand this. And we have an eldership here. So we're going to ask all the churches out here to send us money. And if we can get, 100 churches or 50 churches to send us $100 a month, we can have a massive amount of money. And then we, in turn, the elders here, will make decisions, and we will send money out, and we'll send preachers out to these needy churches, and we'll relieve their need. Now, when you do this, then, this now becomes, it's where the sponsoring church has the oversight of the work, but who's paying the bill? It's the churches back there that are sending the money and paying the bill. See? What's the Monroe Church doing? Well, we are pooling the other church's money, and we're overseeing the spending of it. And so the elders tonight then here sits down, and we have $25,000 that these brethren have sent. And so then we decide, okay, this preacher right here, let's support him so much, and let's support this one so much. And so we start making the decisions. And we say the reason we're doing this is because it is a Bible example. It's a Bible example. You see those churches over there? They sent to the Jerusalem church? There's no similarity, is there? See? In the Bible, when one church sent to another church, what was the basis? It sent to that church to relieve a need. It didn't send to that church for that church to take control of the money and oversee how it will be spent somewhere else that is there. And so it's really simple, but this is the way it happened. So they said, okay, we'll do this. Then another church says, okay, we're now going to ask people to send us money. So there's a church in Abilene, Texas, that wrote letters to every church in the Brotherhood and said, please send us $12.50. If you'll send us $12.50, we, the sponsoring church, we have made an agreement, I think it was with ABC, and we will put a program on radio and television in behalf of Churches of Christ. So they raised massive amounts of money. Churches started sending that, and so they had, whatever it took to pay that bill. And so then people got to looking and saying, here it is, this church then, they, instead of sending it to a needy church, they hired a preacher and put him on ABC. And so they then started out and they said, the Churches of Christ salute you. And this program is presented by the Highland Avenue Church, and the Churches of Christ salute you. So people got scratching their head and said, wait just a minute, hold it. Now the Churches of Christ, now they're speaking for us here. The Churches of Christ salute you. I don't know whether they should speak for us or not. Do they have that authority? Right? Well, we're just speaking for the churches that gave. Well, okay. So you're overseeing then that work. Then whose work is it? Is it yours or is it theirs? So they said, then they started out, this program is brought to you by the Church of Christ in Highland. These giving churches wrote them and said, wait a minute, we're paying the bill. It's brought to us by us. We want credit. So then they changed and said, well, it's brought to you by the Churches of Christ in America. Another church said, wait a minute, it's not brought by the Church of Christ in America. We're not sending you any money. And they said, well, what do we say? We can't please you. Well, the answer is you can't say anything because anything you say is wrong. And why is it anything you say is wrong? Because you got an organization, it's not in the Bible. Okay? But that came from this verse right here. See, this chapter. This is one of them. There's two or three that are there. Okay, we got to close tonight because